The empire had ruled from Vienna's gates to the Persian Gulf for 600 years. In 1918, it took 4 to end it. On October 30th, 1918, aboard the HMS Agamemnon, Ottoman Navy Minister Rauf Bey signed away the war. The Armistice of Mudros demanded full demobilization and Allied control of every strait in the empire. Constantinople had never fallen to an enemy fleet in 500 years. Within 3 weeks, it did. Foreign troops walked streets no invader had crossed since the 15th century, and the Sultan let them. Mehmed VI ruled what remained, but every real decision now passed through Allied high commissioners instead. Inland, army officers who had never surrendered began asking a question the capital would not answer. 6 months later, a fleet from a different enemy would land on this coast and change everything. On May 15, 1919, Greek troops landed at Smyrna under Allied protection, and the ground war began. A single shot from an Ottoman barracks window turned a ceremonial landing into hours of open killing. By nightfall, roughly 300 Turks and about 100 Greeks lay dead in a single afternoon. Yet while Athens celebrated the landing, one exiled Ottoman officer read the reports and saw only opportunity. Every occupied nation in history has faced the same test: submit to the terms or answer them differently. Within days, word of the landing reached every garrison in Anatolia, and every officer read it differently. The Smyrna landing alone displaced nearly 150,000 people from the city and its surrounding villages. Villages that had stayed quiet under Allied occupation began arming themselves the moment Greek troops advanced inland. The old imperial army had nowhere left to gather, so a new one began forming outside the Sultan's reach. This is where resistance stopped being scattered anger and became something the empire could no longer ignore. On April 23, 1920, the Grand National Assembly convened in Ankara, a government the Sultan never recognized. In August 1920, the Sultan's government signed away Anatolia itself, and Ankara refused to honor a word of it. Mustafa Kemal, formerly an Ottoman staff officer, now commanded a government the Sultan had sentenced to death. Ankara had almost no artillery, no navy, and no recognized government. Yet somehow it kept fighting anyway. By January 1921, Greek forces pushed toward Eskişehir, testing whether Ankara's new army could hold a line. But the January battle no history book emphasizes is the one that proved the new army could actually win. Every farmer along that road faced the same choice civilians have always faced. Which army do you feed? The fighting through the summer of 1921 cost both armies thousands of men for ground that changed hands twice. By August, the Greek army had advanced within 50 miles of Ankara, the closest it would ever get. The assembly handed Kemal personal command of the army, a power no single Ottoman officer had held in a century. Both armies now stood on opposite banks of one river, and neither side could afford to lose what came next. This is the battle Turkish veterans would later call their Armageddon. 22 days that decided everything. King Constantine himself came to the front, certain this battle would finally break the Turkish resistance for good. Turkish officers died at a rate near 70% in places, giving the battle its grim nickname afterward. One sergeant on that ridge held his position for 6 straight days without relief, resupply, or replacement. On September 8th, Kemal personally led a counterattack the Greek line barely held, and everything nearly reversed. By the battle's end, the two armies had suffered more than 60,000 dead, wounded, and missing combined. But the retreat no Greek communique announced was already underway. The army was pulling back to its old line. Every exhausted army in history reaches the same point, when advancing further costs more than retreating does. Constantine broke off the assault on September 14th, and his army crossed back over the river it had come from. The assembly awarded Kemal the rank of field marshal. The first time in a century, Ankara felt safe. For 11 months after Sakarya, neither army moved. But Kemal was already planning the offensive that would end it. Sakarya had stopped the Greek army. What came next was designed to remove it from Anatolia completely. This is the stage where 11 months of quiet preparation turned into the largest offensive of the entire war. Turkey massed roughly 104,000 men, moved entirely by ox cart, with no motor transport at all. Greece still fielded over 200,000 men. On paper, still the larger force by a wide margin. 3 years of war had already cost both nations well over 100,000 dead by this point alone. One artillery captain had orders to open fire at the exact minute Kemal's attack began, and not 1 second earlier. On August 26, 1922, the attack began at Dumlupınar, and within 4 days, the Greek line simply broke. But the order that actually doomed the Greek army wasn't a battlefield failure. It was a change of command in May. Every retreating army creates the same tragedy: soldiers who can run and civilians who have nowhere left to go. At Dumlupınar, roughly half the Greek army of 200,000 men was killed, captured, or scattered outright. Turkish forces covered nearly 250 miles in under 2 weeks, chasing the Greek army to the coast. By September 8th, Turkish cavalry had reached Smyrna itself, the very city where this war had begun. The city that had celebrated Greek soldiers 3 years earlier now held 150,000 people with nowhere to go. This is the final stage, the 9 days that decided who would live in Smyrna and who would not. Historians still dispute the death toll from what followed. Estimates range from 10,000 to over 100,000. One mother waited 3 days on that quay before a foreign ship's crew finally agreed to take her aboard. One answer still remained unsettled: whether the empire itself would survive what was about to happen in Anatolia. But while Smyrna burned, the real ending was already being drafted 300 miles away in Ankara. Every collapsing empire in history reaches the same final question: who gets to decide what replaces it? On November 1st, 1922, the Grand National Assembly voted on a single question: did the Sultanate still exist? The vote passed. 6 centuries of Ottoman rule ended not with an army, but with a show of hands. On November 17th, Mehmed VI boarded a British warship into exile and never set foot in Turkey again. The empire that once stretched across 3 continents ended with 1 signature, 1 vote, and 1 departing ship. The Treaty of Lausanne, signed in July 1923, gave the new Turkish state borders no empire had ever secured. On October 29, 1923, the Republic of Turkey was declared, with Mustafa Kemal as its first president. Mehmed VI died in exile in Italy in 1926, never once acknowledging that his throne no longer existed. That quay where an officer once signed away an empire, 600 years undone in exactly 4. Where an empire once stood, a republic now did. And this time, the ending was final.